Hey guys, welcome back to the map design series. So, in some games, you may notice you have to stay glued to your map UI to not get lost, disoriented, or go the wrong way when backtracking somewhere. Maps where you do have to constantly check your map UI to orient yourself have particular features that make getting lost and disoriented, and thereby impeding the flow of the game, almost unavoidable. It does not have to be that way though. Moreover, these maps also tend to be the most difficult to remember and piece together from memory, and those two things are related. So, today I'm going to talk about two concepts that I think explain what makes a map intuitive, or I guess unintuitive, to navigate, and by extension, what makes a map memorable. Derivability and orientation, aka what I call the 90-degree principle. But before I get into those, if you're new here, then hi, my name is Verminubis. I'm a game developer making a game called Ghost Hand, which you can see here. It is a Metroidvania, and it's why I care about map design. I put links to the Steam page down below, so do check it out. I'd appreciate it. Anyway, I got interested in this topic after playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Aria of Sorrow back to back, which, by the way, I'll just be referring to as Soten and Aria for short. Despite having played through both of them roughly the same number of times, I noticed how much more frequently I had to check my map when backtracking through Aria, and how, to this day, I still can't piece the Aria map together from memory. I do notice a difference between games whose maps have a certain organizational and spatial logic that give them definite form versus games whose maps never fully take shape in my mind, in the sense that I never can clearly visualize how everything in the map links together. In other words, there's a difference between a map that you come to understand versus one that you simply memorize by rote after enough reps. So, this brings us to that first concept I mentioned, which is derivability. To understand what I mean by that, let me ask you, do you know off the top of your head what the 16th letter of the alphabet is? If you do, then I didn't expect that. The answer I expected was no. But whatever the case, you can easily derive the 16th letter of the alphabet by singing the alphabet song. And that same logic can be applied to navigation. You could put me at a random spot on the map in Soten, and I'd be able to derive a route to any other point in the map. Again, certain structural features can either undermine or improve your ability to navigate and comprehend a space. By contrast, there's no chance I could do that in Aria short of rote memorization of the map. So why is that? That's where these graphs and maps come in, and where the second concept comes in, orientation and the 90-degree principle. These two maps differ in a very particular way, and I want to see if we're seeing the same thing, so pause for a second here if you need some time to think it over. At first glance, you may notice that even aesthetically, Aria of Sorrow's map seems a lot more maze-like, and I have a very specific definition for the term maze-like that'll show why this isn't just an aesthetic difference. First though, let's trace through a path from the clock tower to the arena in Aria's map, this point up here in the clock tower, to this point down here in the arena, and a path from the catacombs in Symphony of the Night's map down here to this point up here. And same as before, take a second if you want to do this on your own. Now, if you're done, did you at any point when tracing through those paths notice yourself trying to look for paths in the opposite direction by default? You most likely scanned for paths in the direction of the destination unless no path in that direction was available, right? Did you notice any differences in how you traced the path in each case? If you did, then these graphs can probably explain them. They represent the paths that we just traced through in the Soten and Aria maps. Each circle represents a room, and each connecting line's color represents one of 4 types of connections between rooms relative to your destination. Green represents the correct path in the correct direction, and path and direction here are different, with correct path meaning a sequence of rooms that leads to your destination, and correct path means you're traveling in the same direction as your destination relative to your starting point. So green is good. An example of green is starting from here in the catacombs. Our destination is northeast, Long Library, and this path will indeed take us to Long Library, and it's headed in the correct direction, north. So that is a green path. Again, green is good. Next, we have yellow paths, which represent the correct path, but the incorrect direction. And that might sound bad, but the extenuating factor is that there is no path ambiguity. Yellow doesn't negatively impact navigability since no confounding intermediate paths means no possibility of taking a wrong turn. Yellow is fine, and at worst, neutral. An example of a yellow path is where we briefly went west here on our way to Long Library. So you can see we're going north here, then we go west to this room. But there are no confounding intermediate paths, and I'm not counting these two rooms. They're hidden rooms, so not counting them. But we just automatically get spat back out on the correct path in the correct direction. So yellow's fine, nothing wrong with it. Next, we have orange paths. Orange represent the incorrect path in the correct direction. Orange paths force us to consult the map because there's no way to infer that you won't be sent down the wrong path based on direction alone. And the first example that we encountered on our trace through of Aria of Sorrows map is right here. So we are trying to go southwest, and we are at a southern and a western juncture. It's not clear based on inference alone which way is the correct path. If we go south here, we will be going on the wrong path. If we go west, we'll be going the correct path. So this is a point at which you need to consult the map. And lastly, we have red paths. Red is the correct path in the incorrect direction, but the path is ambiguous. Red means the map has not only forced you to go left in order to go right, and vice versa, and same applies to go up to go down and go down to go up, but unlike yellow, you are now presented with a choice and have to check your map because there's no way to infer which path is correct. Red, to me, is the worst offender in terms of impairing your ability to understand a space relative to another. An example of a red path is right here in the underground reservoir. So on our trace through here, you may notice we are going in the incorrect direction relative to our destination. We are now going east, and not only are we going east, but in contrast to in Symphony of the Night's case, where we went briefly west but had no confounding intermediate paths, here we do have confounding intermediate paths. We do not know which of these is the correct path. So at this point, direction as a navigational tool has been undermined. We now have to check our map. Confusion is at its maximum. Tying this all together, I wouldn't be surprised if you found it tougher to trace a path through Aria's map. Just look at the relative frequency of orange and red in Aria compared to Soten. 4 orange paths, 2 red paths compared to Soten's 1 orange path. Orange and red paths represent detours that force you to consult your map at the risk of going the wrong way. That is, it's hard to derive a path using direction as a navigational tool, so you have to instead memorize a series of arbitrary twists and turns which gets you turned around and makes you lose track of where you are relative to your destination. More red and orange means greater risk of disorientation. A majority of green and yellow paths, however, means you can hug the perimeter of the map in the direction of your destination and most likely get to your destination or close to it. In Soten, you are very rarely traveling at greater than a 90-degree angle to your destination, the 90-degree principle, which is just a fancy way of saying the map very seldom forces you to go in the opposite direction of your destination in order to get to your destination. Royal Chapel is probably the best visual example of this, where the path from any exit or entry point is oriented along the northeast-southwest axis. And a desirable byproduct of the 90-degree principle is it usually means there aren't a lot of filler rooms, or what I call elbow rooms or pivot rooms. Elbow rooms is funnier, but as a result of needing rooms to pad out changes in direction. I also think it engenders an experience of a map that feels like a solid whole rather than a soup of disjoint areas. So, my definition of maze-like that I mentioned earlier is the relative prevalence of orange and red paths, which correlates nicely with the heavily folded and coiled appearance of Aria's map in contrast to Soten's. Again, that cosmetic difference isn't just an accident, but is a manifestation of something that materially and fundamentally changes how you interact with and remember the map. So you can probably start to see how all of this ties into memorability. You can derive the next letter in the alphabet from musical logic, and when there's consistent navigational logic, you can derive a path from one point to another by linking one room to the next. In essence, each violation of the 90-degree principle represents an exception in logic, and exceptions are hard to remember. Now, it's worth mentioning that I don't think there's such a thing as a map that doesn't involve occasional detours. The question is how frequent those detours are and the degree of ambiguity and complexity they introduce into navigation. The yellow lines in the grass represent what are, to me, perfectly acceptable structural features of a map. Orange and red, on the other hand, have a pretty reliable correspondence with how unintuitive a map is to navigate and how often you have to interrupt the game to pull up the map. From a design perspective, the question is then, how do you avoid all this? Aria's map, I would guess, is the result of what I call a future agnostic approach to map design, which is sort of just a nice way of saying that the planning probably wasn't great and that the map was probably built in a very as-you-go and improvised kind of way. And when you take that approach, the map becomes like wild ivy and just grows wherever and however it wants, which forces the designer to work around existing structures and basically to find whatever space happens to be available to do what they need. In this sense, to me, Soten's map feels like a tree that grew from a single seed, while Aria's feels a little bit like a Frankenstein that was hastily stitched together from surplus parts. So, the more organized something is, the easier it tends to be to remember. If you remember math class, you know that it's easier to do a problem when you understand the logic and can work through it, rather than having to remember every step in disconnected isolation. And when you have a lot of filler rooms, a lot of arbitrary changes in direction, a navigational logic becomes very quickly diluted and undermined. Moreover, direction isn't the only thing that can influence derivability. Take a look at this map of Brinstar from Super Metroid. Not to make Metroid Dread my whipping boy any more than I already have, but if you compare Brinstar's map on the left here to Cadarus's map on the right, you can eyeball them and see an apparent organizational logic to Brinstar, while Cadarus's is a lot more like the wild ivy I mentioned. Brinstar's map very closely resembles a tree structure, and trees are easy to search and navigate logically. This is just one more example of how organizational principles can be applied to maps and the effects that organization has versus just going with the flow. I also want to mention that because we're complicated creatures with complicated minds, how memorable something is depends on a lot of things, certainly not least of which is the aesthetic component of the space you're in. But aesthetics are a little bit past the scope of this video, so that's for another day. To that, you may have had the opposite experience between Soten and Aria. I don't mean to say that a person is wrong for having a certain experience, rather, I just have an explanation for my own. Anyway, I do hope you guys found this interesting. I mentioned in my last video I was going to talk about geometric linearity versus perceptual linearity in my next video, but I still gotta let that one cook a little bit. But hopefully this one will do you guys in the meantime. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.